remercie énormément au comité organisateur de cette conférence qui m'a donné l'occasion vraiment inespérée de parler en compagnie de tous ces juristes extraordinaires. Et je me considère définitivement comme étant la moindre ici. Donc, pour continuer en anglais, my paper examines why it is worthwhile for Canadians to extend fraternity at the international level, and how a sine qua non condition of fraternity is the protection of others' liberty and equality. I contend that if Canada wants to participate in building a sustainable international community, the extension of fraternity must consist in, among other things, divorcing itself from human rights abuses throughout the world. And I will end the presentation with a few words on Bill C-300, which attempted to attach financial consequences to human rights abuses by Canadian companies in developing countries, a bill that was defeated in October 2010. My arguments are grounded in the decade of Justice Gantier's reflections on fraternity. He began by thinking about fraternity at the domestic level in Canada, but in later years explored the applicability and the extension of the principle to the global community, particularly in relation to sustainable development. I do fully acknowledge that fraternity is still dans un état d'ébauche, but I hope that this intellectual exercise will be somewhat useful to think about what it takes to truly extend fraternity at the international level. And by sustainable international community, I wish to specify that I not only refer to the environmental aspect of that term, though it is highly important, but to also the political aspect. A sustainable international community, I envision it as a peaceful one, where states cooperate together in pursuit of common goals. Now, fraternity is a multifaceted concept. It is shaped by different moral and ideological associations. And after reviewing the origin of value and its historical manifestations throughout politics and society, Justice Gantier understood it best in its community-building role. And I cite, "I wish to join this course by suggesting that fraternity advances a number of core values in pursuit of forming a community. These values include empathy, cooperation, responsibility, commitment, fairness, trust, and equality. These are not so much independent elements of fraternity as they are interrelated threads weaving the cloth of fraternity." Now, the goal of fraternity is hence to work together to achieve the highest quality of individual existence. And through the lens of Justice Gantier's reflection, Professor Jacques-Yvan Morin sees fraternity as a condition de la cohésion sociale. Now, there are quite a few well-accepted synonyms for fraternity. And Judge Duval-Essler perhaps would have preferred solidarity. I think that by choosing this particular word over, say, brotherhood or solidarity, he was choosing a word with very close ties to the rise of liberalism, liberté, égalité, fraternité. And Justice Gantier, who remained very attached to the philosophy of liberalism, never spoke about fraternity without linking it to liberty and to equality in some way. Now, some of Justice Gantier's most well-known articles on fraternity acknowledge that it is implicit, unspoken, and even that despite permeating so many aspects of law in his view, it was forgotten. It was the forgotten element of democracy. Now, there appears to be a symbiotic relationship, along with something of a chicken and egg dilemma, between the presence of fraternity in policy discourse and the adoption of laws containing fraternity principles. Justice Gantier began publicly promoting fraternity only after a long career observing it at work quietly, implicitly, yet also widely within the legal system of Canada, a mature, full-blown society. However, I argue that from what we can see, when emerging communities are being built, for example, when states establish a common market, as we have talked yesterday about the European Union and numerous mentions of solidarity in the treaties that found it. Or when individuals form a state and draft a constitution, then fraternity is most often shouted from the rooftops. In these situations, the people in the states, they feel the need to articulate their good faith explicitly, their commitment to each other. And it is reasonable to assume that we need such an express acknowledgement of the importance of fraternity whenever we think about building a community, and especially when we think about building an international community that is to be sustainable. Now, an example of this is Article 1 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, where the international community appears to have itself acknowledged the importance of the concept of fraternity. All human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. They are endowed with reason and conscience and should act towards one another in a spirit of brotherhood. Brotherhood is linked to liberty and equality, and it is put in this very first article that establishes all the forging elements of a community. Now, for Justice Gontier, there was no hierarchy between liberty, equality, and fraternity in the community. He affirmed that liberty and equality cannot be maintained in a society where fraternity does not find its place. And most interestingly, he admitted the view that fraternity was the glue that binds liberty and equality to a civil society, the necessary adjunct to liberty and equality that imports these values into a community. It seems to me that Gontier saw that fraternity, in its community-forging role, was a vector of liberty and equality. Of course, there is the use of fraternity to spread liberty and equality in examples such as revolutions, the French Revolution being the most notable. But I believe we need another model, another example of the way fraternity can aid in the spreading of liberty and equality for the international community. We don't want it to get to a point where disgruntled groups actually claim it by force. And in that sense, perhaps the 20th century civil rights movement or the women's movement can provide better examples in terms of their relevance to the international community and community building at that level. Because the minorities in question gained their rights by advocating for a change in mentality, wherein the dominant group began seeing them as similar to them. And they recognized that they shared a common humanity, and therefore acted fraternally in extending to them the liberty and equality that they deserved as human beings possessing human dignity. So it was this sense of identification, this sense of who is my neighbor, that, the answer to the question, who is my neighbor, by including in the definition of who is my neighbor, all these previously disenfranchised minorities. The sense of identification with someone else that gives rise to a sentiment of fraternity, that then provides the impetus for the extension of liberty and equality. So it's the recognition of the other being the same as the us. Now, having established these two things, that fraternity is the building block of the community, and that fraternity acts as a vector of liberty and equality, I ask the question, do we have what it takes to build a community of the international sphere? Certainly, we have what we may call a de facto international community, because we share interests. We are interdependent in terms of resources, and we share in the environmental consequences of industrial activities. But for Justice Gontier, you needed two essential things to have a community, and that is shared identity and shared values. He articulated this in a passage of his article in 2000, which I won't cite because it is quite long. With respect to the shared identities prong, I believe that the growth of information and communications technology has made many people across the world acutely aware of their common humanity by developing a shared consciousness. And we may see this particularly recently with the Iranian protests, what happens in Egypt, what happens in Libya. We are so much more aware of how people there feel This is also due to social media, because we no longer rely, even on the internet, we used to rely on objective media services to mediate between us and them. And now these people who are living certain situations of crisis or who are being abused, they can go directly and speak about their subjective feelings and experiences and opinions and transmit them to people all over the world. And I believe that this shared consciousness has made us very aware of our shared humanity and has created, for many people across the world, the sense of similarity. We're basically the same as people all over the world. As to the shared values prong, the second prong, this is quite easier because we already have basic international conventions that speak in the united voice of the international community. We have the ICCPR, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. We have the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, and we have the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. We can find this evidence that we have shared values through human rights in all these instruments. So we are not, if we are adopting laws, such as, for example, BC 300, that seek to regulate the behavior, well, not to regulate the behavior, that seek to calm abuses of liberty and equality, we have something to point to that expresses a common understanding of what liberty and equality means. It doesn't impose our view, the majority's view of the good life on the rest of the population. We have these instruments, these minimal standards that the peoples all over the world can claim as their own and can claim to deserve as human beings. Now, Bill C-300, an act respecting corporate accountability for the activities of mining, oil, or gas in developing countries, is a prime example of what a fraternity-driven statute promoting liberty and equality would aim for. And the bill's purpose was a very simple one. It was to attach financial consequences to human rights breaches. And that was to be accomplished through 4 measures. I don't have time to get into all of them right now. But essentially, Canadian extractive companies could lose funding if they were found to be responsible for human rights violations abroad. I will speak about it more extensively in my paper, and Richard Yanda analyzes very aptly the reasons behind this case in a recent note in the Journal of Sustainable Development. But overall, I think that because the Bill C-300 was defeated by just 6 votes, the entire episode showed that there is support for fraternity-driven statutes, at least among 3 of the now 5 official political parties of Canada. And there is potential for a variety of similar legislative proposals. And we can make the first step that we can make to extend liberty and equality for CISDL is quite simply to divest ourselves from human rights abuses. To take the small step from not in our backyard to not on our dime. And after we put forward legislation that says not on our dime, then we can begin to think about attaching financial and penal sanctions to these abuses. My time is up, and thank you very much.